Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. All right, awesome. So tonight's program is an MS Views and News program. This is our MS Summit 2024. I want to thank our sponsors for today. That's Viatris, Sandoz, and Novartis. I hope that you could all give them a round of applause and say thank you. All right, tonight we have Sarah Ikenberry, who's with the FDA. She's going to be speaking with you about biosimilars. Sarah, take it away. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk to you a little bit about biosimilars. This presentation is just going to be a general overview, providing the basics that patients might want to know. Next slide, please. So we'll go into more detail as we go through the presentation, but I just want to set the stage a bit about the conditions that biosimilars treat. And we've got a variety of them here, one of them being multiple sclerosis, but there are also many, many other conditions that are treated by biosimilars and biologic medications. Next slide. But before we talk about biosimilars, it's really helpful to understand a little bit more about biologic medications in general. And so most biologic medications are made in or from natural or living sources like cells or microorganisms like bacteria or yeast. And so because of that, they're usually more complex than other drugs such as aspirin and are more complicated to make because they are from natural sources. And you can see on the screen that there's a range of sizes of these biologics. And so insulin is smaller and it gets really large up to a monoclonal antibody. And there's sort of an inset picture there with the aspirin where it zooms in just on a piece of that monoclonal antibody. And you can see that the aspirin is so tiny compared to that. And so that makes them a lot more just complex in general. Next slide. So here's some boring stuff. This is the key definition in the law that kind of governs biosimilars and the FDA's ability to approve them. And so these are the terms that you'll potentially hear related to biosimilars. So reference product, which is the product that FDA has already approved and which the proposed biosimilar is compared. The biosimilar is a biologic product that's highly similar to and has no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product. And an interchangeable is a biosimilar, and it meets a couple of additional, I want to say standards, but not really, just sort of statutory requirements related to pharmacy substitution, but we'll go into that more. Next slide. And so this kind of breaks down what I just explained in that legal slide in more plain language. And so the biosimilar is very similar but not identical to an original medication known as the reference product that FDA has already approved. It's going to work the same way, which that's the no clinically meaningful differences part. So it's going to provide the same benefits when treating diseases or medical conditions, same strength and dose, not expected to cause new or worsening side effects. And for biosimilars to be approved, the studies must show that there are no differences in the safety and effectiveness of biosimilars and the reference product or original biologic it's compared to. Next slide. So this just shows a high-level overview of the general requirements and data that FDA reviews to determine a medication is biosimilar. And so there's like extensive comparisons of the molecular structure and the bioactivity, which is to make sure the medication works like it's supposed to, making sure the product is pure and there's no impurities. And there's clinical data such as pharmacokinetics, which shows how medication is absorbed and distributed and metabolized by the body to basically make sure it happens the same way that it does in the reference product. Next slide. So because most biologics are made from living sources, it is normal for both biosimilars and the reference products to have minor differences between batches of the same medication. So this is because of the nature of making medication out of a living source. And so cells can make copies of a protein and they can be an exact copy, but there's other add-ons and tiny little changes that can occur, resulting in like tiny versions and just different versions of the same molecule. And so there's millions of slightly different versions of the same protein or antibody per dose or batch. And so one way to think about this is sort of like a recipe for making bread or beer or wine. All biologic medications, including biosimilars, are similar to loaves of bread if they are made with the same recipe, including yeast, which is a living source. And so no one loaf is an exact copy of another, but they are all the same type of bread. So this is true for biologics. Each batch can be is made with a mix of ingredients that include living sources, and because living sources have these slight variations, each batch is not an exact copy, but each batch provides the same treatment benefits. Next slide. So how are biosimilars like generics? One way to think about biosimilars is in the context of generics, because biosimilars are like them in some ways in that both medications are compared to like an original or a brand drug for approval. So they're both versions of previously approved FDA medications or previously FDA approved medications, and they may offer more affordable treatment options to patients. The reason why one is a biosimilar and one is a generic is because they are approved through different regulatory pathways. And they both avoid duplicating certain costly clinical trials. So they both go through a rigorous review process, but there are differences between biosimilars and generics. In addition, biosimilars and the reference biologic are generally made from these natural living sources, and the brand are made, the generic and brand are made from chemical ingredients, and chemical ingredients can be more easily copied, whereas the natural and living sources cannot be exactly copied. And so the information needed to demonstrate that a biologic is biosimilar to another biologic is much more extensive than what is needed for a generic to prove they are a copy of a brand. Next slide. So there can be some confusion around the interchangeable biosimilars. And an interchangeable is a biosimilar that may be substituted without consulting the prescriber because it meets additional requirements related to the potential for automatic substitution, which is subject to state laws. But so this works similarly to how you get your generics at the pharmacy. You get your prescription, you go to the pharmacy to fill it. The pharmacist could give you the brand, or they could give you the interchangeable biosimilar. And I recognize that a lot of these medications come from a specialty pharmacy, so you may be getting it in the mail, but it would be the same type of situation. But not all biosimilars are interchangeable, and it's because companies have to specifically request approval of an interchangeable biosimilar specifically. So next slide. And so what are the differences between a biosimilar and an interchangeable biosimilar? Scientifically and clinically, there are no difference. Biosimilars and interchangeable biosimilars both must meet FDA's requirements for showing they're highly similar to and work the same way from a biologic already approved by FDA. It's just the law that governs our ability to approve biosimilars states that if a biosimilar is automatically substituted at the pharmacy, it has to be interchangeable. So therefore, interchangeable biosimilar meets additional requirements related to the potential for this pharmacy substitution. And there's many reasons why companies may not even apply to be interchangeable, such as business reasons or because the medication is administered at a hospital or an outpatient clinic, and you couldn't really get it at a pharmacy anyways. And so you may, and it's okay that you changed, it's okay, you can go to the other slide, but I was just gonna kind of emphasize that you don't have to wait for a biosimilar to be approved as an interchangeable to use it, because they're all like the same standard for biosimilarity, and they can both be used in place of the reference product. And going along that on this slide that's up here is some key points about using these products, and that all of them are safe and effective regardless as if they've been approved as interchangeable, and they can all be prescribed in place of the reference product. They can be used in patients who are treatment experienced, so patients who have taken the reference product, and treatment naive, meaning if you've never had the reference product. And basically we review a lot of information to decide whether or not a biosimilar meets the approval standards and to assure that there are safe and effective treatment options for patients. And that includes ensuring that manufacturers show there are no differences in side effects, including that the side effects of the biosimilar are not more frequent or more severe than those of the reference biologic. And they all undergo the same exact quality testing and assessments. So next slide. Why would a patient switch to a biosimilar? So this is probably one of the biggest questions that we get. And the one thing is that biologic medications are extremely expensive. And if the patient, doctor, or formulary management programs are concerned about cost, they can consider switching to a biosimilar. So, you may be switched due to insurance coverage, or you might be given the interchangeable because the pharmacy can substitute it. Will you, biosimilars are not interchangeable, have to be prescribed by your doctor. Next slide. But will they save you money? And this is another question that we get a lot too. And the answer is it really depends. I think in general, the research is showing that, the savings, there are a lot of savings out there. They're not necessarily trickling down to the patients. They, are saving a lot of money for the healthcare systems, and they're also covered by more insurances. So they are giving people access to drugs that they might not have been able to access before per their insurance. And so the hope is that, the lower cost of development for the biosimilars will eventually save patients money. That is the ultimate goal, is that patients save money, the healthcare system saves money, and that people have access to these life-changing and life-saving treatments. And, if you have questions about that kind of stuff, though, you would have to ask your insurance company or, talk to your pharmacy. Next slide. And so this kind of goes along with that. I would just encourage anybody with questions to talk to their healthcare provider. Next slide. And so the last part of my presentation, I'm just going to review some of the resources and materials that are available for patients, healthcare providers, and really anybody who wants to learn more. Developing education materials is a very important part of the work we do at FDA to support and improve understanding of biosimilars. Next slide. So we have a lot of patient resources available. And so this slide shows a snapshot of some of those. There are fact sheets, videos, infographics, and articles about biosimilars. Next slide. We also have a snapshot of the materials that we have for healthcare providers. So there's fact sheets. We have a bunch of free continuing medical education courses that we've worked on with Medscape. There are videos and additional infographics for healthcare providers. Next slide. And we also have this biosimilar curriculum toolkit that is technically for degree programs that is designed to help educate students in healthcare professional degree programs like medical, nursing, physician associate, pharmacy, et cetera. But anyone that wants to, dive deeper into some of the topics can, certainly go and find out more information. But this is sort of a modular toolkit that is designed for stakeholders or people who are interested in teaching about this to take pieces from what they want and add it to existing curriculum. Next slide. So we've recently, excuse me for a second. I'm sorry, it's been a long day here. To increase accessibility, we have many patient and provider materials translated in multiple languages. And we're very excited about, increasing this accessibility for patients throughout the United States. Next slide. And so this is our Purple Book database, and this is a public online searchable database that has information about most FDA-approved biological products, including biosimilar and interchangeables. And you can search these. There are a variety of sort of ways to get information on the Purple Book. One of them is a simple search where you can just start typing and it will show you options, and you can just select from it and it'll give you a nice screen that shows the product you searched and then any related products. So if you search for biosimilar, it'll show you the reference products, or if there's interchangeables, et cetera, on the screen. You can also go to advanced search, and there's a ton of capabilities in the advanced search, and there are user guides to help with that. Next slide. So this is just additional resources and the links for anybody who would like to learn more. And I think the next slide is my ending. And so thank you for listening and taking the time to learn more about biosimilars for me. I just want to say to anybody that's in the audience that might want to use these materials, you're welcome to use them, to share them, to take them and make them your own. And I think now I'm going to have question and answers.
Sarah, thank you very much for your dialogue. And does anybody in the audience have any questions? If not, I have a couple online. Anybody out there? All right, then I'm going to ask one from online first. When a medicine has a patent that is expired, does that open up the doors for the biosimilar drugs?
Yes, that's one of the many complicated legal sort of patent landscape things that has to happen. So there's exclusivity that drugs get when they get FDA approval for a certain number of years, depending on the product, depending on if it's a rare disease indication or other things. So there's that, and then there's the patent. So that is exactly what happens. The reference product goes off patent, off exclusivity, and it opens up competition for other manufacturers to make that drug.
Great, thank you. Anybody out here yet? Okay, another one online. Person's asking, how do they compare this with the generic? And if it's not generic, then why do some of the doctors say it's the same as generic?
Well, it is the same as generic in that it's the same goal as a generic. You can think about it just like you would think about a generic. The reason why it's not a generic and it's a biosimilar is because it's regulated under a different pathway at FDA, so it can't be generic. Generic drugs are usually just bioequivalence testing. There's a much less data and information that has to be provided in order to prove that you're generic, because it's smaller molecules and you can more easily make copies. Whereas a biosimilar, you have to prove different things. So you have to prove that you're analytically similar, highly similar, and that you have no clinically meaningful differences. So this is just a whole bunch of different data that's required to prove that you're a biosimilar versus what a generic would have to prove.
Okay. The last question I have from online, another one just came in. But meanwhile, a person is asking, how long does it take for a biosimilar to get approved prior, as opposed to a brand medication?
Actually, the review clocks at the FDA are the same. It's like basically a 12-month review clock that they're submitted. So the review timeline is the same at FDA. What's not the same is what happens before it gets to FDA, and that's the development and like the clinical trials that a brand would have to go through, because they have to do clinical trials for every indication that the drug is approved for, whereas the biosimilar has to show that it's biosimilar because it's already proved safety and effectiveness and all of that for the indications for the brand. So there's different development timelines. I think it's still like 7 to 10 years for a biosimilar. Maybe not quite that long. I think it's getting shorter with advancements in science and technology and all of that, but it's still a really long time compared to, say, a generic.
Okay, another question. So when my pharmaceutical company asks me the generic, I can say, no, I want the biosimilar?
If there is a biosimilar available, then you can ask your pharmacist if that is a possibility, or your healthcare provider, if there's a biosimilar available for your biologic. So you absolutely can ask that.
Okay, next. Sorry, we have another one. Person wants to know, gosh, it's hard to read some of these. And the person is asking that, is there a list available somewhere about the biosimilars that are available?
Yeah, well, so that's a little more complicated. There is a list of FDA-approved biosimilars on our website. If you go, like what's up on the screen here, it says fda.gov/biosimilars. On the left navigation, there's a site you can click. It says product information, and that lists all the approved biosimilars. What is not on there is whether or not the drug is actually marketed. And that is like company data and information that they're not required to report back to the FDA. And so to our best guess, there's 38 or so of those biosimilars marketed, but not all of them. For instance, the Enbrel biosimilars won't be marketed until like 2029. Some of the newer approvals, like the Eylea biosimilars, the natalizumab biosimilar, I don't believe those are on the market yet. And so there's varying information about that. And a lot of it I have to just Google.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're going to make a Sarah, thank you very much for being online here right now, okay? And and everybody, nobody's got any questions for her? If not, let's give her a round of applause, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to, of course, thank our sponsors again, who we couldn't make this program happen without them. So we have Viatris, Sandoz, and Novartis, and let's all thank them. And I want to thank you all for being here.